All right, we've got some breaking news for you. It's just come in. President Trump saying he wants a straight 50% tariff on the EU beginning June 1st because trade talks are stuck.
When President Trump unveiled steep tariffs on steel and aluminum imports in March 2018, the reverberations were felt immediately across the European Union. Policymakers, industry leaders, and labor unions alike bristled at what they saw as an aggressive protectionist maneuver, one that threatened both the fabric of transatlantic trade and the health of EU economies reliant on open markets. The announcement, justified by the White House as necessary to safeguard national security, collided head-on with decades of EU policy built around free movement of goods and the World Trade Organization's rules. While Brussels scrambled to find a unified response, ultimately threatening reciprocal tariffs of its own, the intensity of opposition varied from one member state to another. Some nations, whose industrial output and export markets hinge on affordable access to American consumers, led the charge in vociferous condemnation. Others, wary of antagonizing the United States yet determined to defend European solidarity, struck a more cautious tone. Among these, 10 countries emerged as the most outspoken defenders of the principle that tariffs should not serve as blunt instruments in geopolitical feuds. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Germany, as the EU's largest economy and foremost exporter, wasted no time in mounting a forceful rebuttal. Chancellor Angela Merkel's government publicly lamented the lack of prior consultation, stressing that measures taken by Brussels were designed not against the United States, but in defense of our principles of fair competition. German industry associations, from automotive giants to small-scale metal fabricators, echoed this stance. They warned that higher aluminum costs would ripple through supply chains, inflating prices on everything from kitchen appliances to luxury cars. Germany's emphasis on rules-based trade and its intensive lobbying in Washington underscored Berlin's role as the de facto leader of EU resistance. German ministers traveled to the US, met with Congress members, and enlisted both Deutsche Bank and the Federation of German Industries to produce studies detailing the adverse effects of the levies. Their message was clear: retaliation would damage both sides, and only a negotiated outcome could preserve transatlantic harmony. France pursued a parallel path of protest, albeit tinged with a distinctly political flavor. President Emmanuel Macron decried the tariffs as a breach of trust, framing the dispute as emblematic of broader tensions between Europe's vision of global cooperation and America's turn toward unilateralism. Beyond official statements, French trade unions, particularly those linked to the metalworking sector, organized demonstrations outside the U.S. Embassy in Paris, demanding that the government adopt even stronger countermeasures. The French government's readiness to support retaliatory tariffs, including on iconic American goods like bourbon and motorcycles, signaled a willingness to push back hard. Yet Macron balanced his rhetoric with strategic outreach, assuring U.S. allies that France remained committed to NATO and cooperative defense efforts. This dual approach underscored Paris's aim to position itself as both a staunch defender of the EU's economic interests and a bridge builder in transatlantic relations. Italy, grappling with its own economic fragilities, nonetheless emerged as one of the staunchest opponents of the American tariffs. Rome's manufacturing heartlands, stretching from Lombardy's steel mills to Veneto's machinery workshops, felt immediately exposed to higher input costs. The Italian government argued that penalizing European steel and aluminum would reverberate through its small and medium-sized enterprises, most of which lacked the financial heft to absorb sudden price hikes. Deputy Prime Minister Luigi Di Maio condemned the decision in harsh terms, accusing the Trump administration of economic coercion that undermined trust between longtime partners. Italian trade federations rallied to the cause, generating public petitions and staging high-profile events to draw attention to the plight of local foundries and forging operations. Though Italy was often divided internally over broader EU policies, its defiance on this issue proved a rare point of consensus across the political spectrum. Spain's reaction combined economic pragmatism with a strong rhetorical response. As a significant exporter of automobiles, construction materials, and high-tech components to the U.S., Spain faced a direct hit if steel and aluminum surcharges filtered through global supply chains. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's administration decried the tariffs as an affront to international law, while Spanish ambassadors to Washington worked round the clock to underscore the mutual benefits of open trade. Spanish steelmakers, many clustered in the Basque Country and Catalonia, spearheaded legal challenges within the WTO framework, filing formal complaints over the unilateral nature of the levies. Simultaneously, Spain leveraged its role on the UN Security Council to spotlight the issue in broader discussions about fair trade practices. This dual track of diplomatic pressure and legal recourse showcased Madrid's determination to defend both national interests and the integrity of the multilateral system. The Netherlands, with its bustling ports and re-export hubs, occupied a unique position in the dispute. Rotterdam, the largest port in Europe, serves as a critical node for steel shipments destined not only for the Netherlands but for much of the continent. Dutch officials emphasized that any tariff on American imports would be tantamount to taxing European consumers and industries indirectly. The Dutch Prime Minister labeled the tariffs economically senseless and predicted that they would set off a chain reaction of counter-tariffs around the globe. Beyond rhetoric, the Netherlands Ministry of Economic Affairs coordinated closely with the port authorities to model possible trade diversions and quantify potential job losses. In public statements, Dutch business chambers projected that even a few months of uncertainty could disrupt investment plans and encourage suppliers to seek alternative markets, thereby eroding the EU's competitive edge. Ireland, while smaller in industrial scale, voiced deep displeasure rooted in its own manufacturing sector and its broader reliance on a stable trading environment. The Irish government lamented that agricultural exporters, particularly in the dairy and beef sectors, could eventually bear collateral damage if trade relations frayed. Ireland's uniquely open economy and its strategic focus on microchip assembly and pharmaceuticals added further dimensions to the debate. Even indirect cost increases for aluminum fixtures or steel equipment threatened to dampen foreign direct investment. Dublin's formal complaint to the WTO emphasized that the security justification for the tariffs lacked any grounding in a genuine threat to U.S. defense capabilities, thereby violating Article 9 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Irish parliamentarians staged a rare all-party motion condemning the decision, and the nation's EU commissioner championed punitive measures to calibrate a more forceful response. Belgium, at the heart of EU institutions in Brussels, naturally assumed a central role in shaping the collective reaction. While the Belgian economy is comparatively modest in the global metals market, its political establishment framed the tariffs as an attack on the very principles underpinning the EU's single market. Belgian ministers emphasized that the 28-nation bloc had long upheld liberalized trade and reinforced global supply chains, making any deviation via unilateral levies particularly pernicious. Business groups in Flanders and Wallonia quickly issued joint statements calling for solidarity with affected member states, and Belgium's trade representatives shuttled between EU capitals to broker a more uniform negotiating stance. From Brussels' vantage point, the most dangerous precedent was the risk of fragmentation. If one country accepted new US demands, others might follow, weakening the EU's capacity to speak with one voice. Poland's stance was colored by its evolving economic profile and its cautious geopolitical calculus. As an emerging center for heavy manufacturing and an investor-friendly market for steel producers, Poland saw the tariffs as an assault on its growth trajectory. Warsaw's officials underscored that any restriction on raw materials would not only inflate domestic costs, but also jeopardize planned expansions in sectors such as automotive parts and household appliances. At the same time, Poland sought to avoid an overt diplomatic rupture with the United States, given its reliance on American security guarantees amid regional tensions. Consequently, Polish protests were firm but measured. Warsaw backed the European Commission's threat of retaliatory tariffs, yet refrained from the more inflammatory language employed by some of its EU peers. This dual strategy reflected Poland's balancing act between safeguarding economic interests and nurturing a strategic partnership across the Atlantic. Sweden, with its advanced manufacturing and design-led industries, expressed alarm at how quickly the global trade architecture could unravel. Swedish firms in sectors like precision engineering and renewable energy components depend heavily on cost-competitive steel and aluminum for their equipment. Stockholm's government highlighted that the proposed levies threaten to trigger a domino effect, compelling other economic powers to erect their own barriers. Sweden's trade minister warned that this tit-for-tat approach risked spiraling into a new era of protectionism detrimental to all. Swedish think tanks and policy institutes contributed detailed analyses projecting the long-term damage to GDP growth, reinforcing the political outcry with hard data. The Swedish Business Federation rallied its members, organizing virtual conferences and white papers to strengthen the EU's negotiating hand with Washington. Austria rounded out the list with a response that melded economic concern with a wider appeal to the principles of fair competition. Austria's industrial backbone, ranging from steelworks in Linz to high-precision machinery in Styria, stood vulnerable to any uptick in raw material costs. The Austrian chancellor publicly criticized the tariffs as detrimental to the rules-based order, emphasizing that Austria's role as a neutral mediator in various international disputes made it a natural advocate for dialogue over division. Austrian labor unions joined the chorus, staging peaceful protests and coordinating messaging with their counterparts in Germany and Italy. Meanwhile, Austria's EU commissioner took to the airwaves in Europe and North America, framing the dispute as illustrative of what happens when economic power is wielded without accountability. This broad coalition of voices underscored how far-reaching the consequences of the tariffs could become, extending well beyond the steel mills to the core ethos of multilateralism. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on which EU country opposes Trump's tariffs the most? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.